Prey is a game taking place on an alien-infested space station. In other words, my mind? The title never conceals its agenda to deliver an immersive experience in the spirit of System Shock 2 and BioShock. So the main mechanics that are fueling the aforementioned classics are reflected back in the game world established in and around Space Station Talos 1 as well. The story is more decent than the metasphere will suggest, as the game is not afraid to telegraph impending doom as your final destination, letting you wonder all the while if the creators will indeed be mean enough to inevitably end you at the end. More on the story later. The game world of Prey reflects super diligent attention focused on vast environmental complexity. The alien-infested space station Talos 1, backwards Isolate, is a pretty magnificent medley of interconnected subsets that create a completely believable environmental simulation of a monolithic installation in space. The game isn't too agitated nor is too reluctant to let the player gain full access to the entirety of Talos 1. Initially, the plot constrains your choices strictly and smartly enough to familiarize you with all your options, but once all bulkheads are open on the gigantic whole of the station, you gain access to all areas, even via taking shortcuts between any 2 points right from deep space. The most charming aspect of the game is its persistent game world. If you happened to drop a teacup on an isolated sofa in the Neuromod division, then that teacup will be there on your next visitation as well. This sense and reality of an entirely explorable space station is fantastically intriguing and reigns as a vastly underappreciated attribute of the whole experience. There is only one drawback. The activities you will perform on the various levels of Talos 1 are quite samey in the sense that none of the areas will challenge any of the conventions that you have mastered prior reaching any points of said challenges. In other words, Prey secretly loves you and takes great care of you while visiting Obstacle Course Talos 1, because you are the player, the sacred entity the experience is happening for. The aforementioned method of how an obstacle could be overcome with any and all sets of skills is pretty much a staple during the entire game. So the choices you make to develop your character sadly aren't really as significant, because the levels are engineered in a way as to let the player make successful use of any skills the player has. If one lacks all skills to overcome an obstacle, then an alternate physical route will be offered. Subsequently, the title never quite throws you a curved ball, and if you are careful at conserving your resources, you will end up with 42 health kits on normal difficulty. Not because you are a badass player, but because you are a System Shock 2 player. As such, during your exploration of Talos 1, you'll become more and more adept at performing these various skills and feats. But you will soon realize that almost every single obstacle or problem you face could be overcome by any and all skills you happen to excel at. If a locked door blocks your passage, and you lack the required hacking value, you can be absolutely sure that you can either tank your way through with brute physical strength, or you can find an alternate route in, which might be more time consuming, but it saves you the hacking and the ego parade. In the context of set skills and feats, Prey prides itself in the notion that it features various gameplay styles, but the case, as we have seen, is not entirely that. The title features a set of challenge tropes instead. Yet, although these challenges can be overcome with various methods indeed, the result of overcoming them is always the same. You will gain access to the room, or you will find yourself on the other side of the door, or your enemy will be dead. So the different playstyle thing is illusoric, as are most things in Prey. Here is the truth, as it is. The title secretly is quite fervent and even manic at wanting you to see doing direct combat against its various enemies, and sooner than later you will submit to its unrelenting desires. Because you'll realize that sneaking is not really a viable option, nor is an encouraged one. The designers wanted you to do combat, only they refused to admit it. The combat in Prey is interesting at first, a chore in the middle, and frankly quite painful and boring upon reaching the narrative peak moments of the story. By these times you want the whole thing to be over with, and you feel like a bear pestered by mosquitoes, such is your overpowerment. In the gameplay context, Prey mistakes quantity for quality and throws everything and the kitchen sink at you in a desperate attempt to maintain the assumed intensity that it failed to flesh out in the first place. On top of that, if you want to be the good girl or good guy in the context of the narrative, then Prey will force you to backtrack. Essentially, backtracking is the currency of being the good gal or being the good guy. If you are playing a psycho with no remorse towards any living beings, then you are free to waste everyone, and the game doubtless telegraphs an interesting dilemma throughout. Is it worth trying to save anyone on a metaphoric ship if and when the ship is bound to self-destruct? Prey has its rhythm even when you are not busy making narrative progress, and instead you concentrate on exploration. Prey commits only one key mistake herein, but a significant one. Whenever you revisit a section of Talos 1 that you have explored before, the game suddenly becomes panicky and unrelenting in a desperate pursuit of action, repopulating the environment with a fresh surge of enemies for you to sink your teeth in. It is very easy to feel that these respawned monsters are coming to existence as a result of a behind-the-scenes trigger state, and definitely not as a result of any sort of dynamic monitoring of how and why a given typhon should pop up in your vicinity. They are spawned on a dice roll. From 1 to 5, typhon will spawn. On 6, the game rolls again. This is highly suboptimal. It is your very presence that makes them pop up, which, in theory, complements the mere title of the game rather nicely, but it is worth noting that there is a gaping discontinuity between playstyle and level transitions. This means that no matter how careful you were at a given area to remain as low profile as possible, the next area you transition to will still host a healthy set of Typhon if and when the trigger state has been activated, as the game has no other primary method to intimidate you than to throw Typhon at you. Prey gives you Typhons to kill, because Typhons allegedly are scary and challenging to combat against. But are they really? Here comes the dormant problem of profound significance. The more Typhon you throw at me, and the more I kill of them, the less threatening they become. This inflation becomes gradually more and more pronounced during the game, and it is saddening to watch it unfold. Upon killing your 100th Typhon Phantom, you did not really survive a horrific encounter with a hyper-hostile sci-fi organism. As you have killed 99 of them already, you have just whacked yet another species of a generic enemy type, and not because you wanted to, either, but because you were given no other choice by the game. You have completed a chore imposed by the mechanics, similar to the act of washing a coffee mug in the primary world. Typhons are gradually becoming more like annoying obstacle elements than threats, a nuisance to take care of, as they are quite easy to whack when you commit to the correct methodology of guerrilla tactics, and doing it properly takes attention and time. During these engagements, Prey won't let you focus on anything else than combat, so if you want to explore a previously visited area down to the last bolt, then you will have to purge the Typhons out of that area yet again. The sense of being here, done that does not serve the game well at all, and this especially is true when you realize that your best option is indeed to take the Typhons out, as sinking the minutes in to whack them is still preferable to being spotted and surprised by them. You can't argue the fact that the enemies are fervent and efficient enough at player punishment as to take your will away from even attempting to go Rambo on them. Regardless of the set of weapons and abilities you will choose to rely on, going full-out Rambo on a room of Typhons is an extremely high-risk scenario, and your best bet is to go guerrilla on the baddies and use cover under all circumstances. Mech combat aside, exploration is cool. Collecting all items is good for you, since Prey has a quite interesting ecosystem that lets you break down all items to its source materials, letting you reconstruct any item of choice for the right material price, provided you have the blueprint for the item and access to a fabricator machine. This elegant architecture guarantees that every item has its value, making exploration an essential element of building your character into a more reliable Typhon killer, as doing so really is your best bet. There are no powers in effect that would prevent you from maxing out your capacities at dark matter destruction. But the thing is, even at medium capacity, you will obliterate Typhon like there is no tomorrow. The main problem is that the game does not really give you reliable and interesting methods to avoid confrontation. And, despite of the play your way ethos, the gameplay choices of Prey generally boil down to the following. 1. Murder Typhon S with weapons. 2. Murder Typhon S with Typhon powers. 3. Murder Typhon S with weapons and Typhon powers. 4. Try sneaking and realize you won't succeed, so roll again, then rinse and repeat. It is especially suboptimal and immersion breaking that the turrets of the game will hunt you and shoot you if you have high enough Typhon material in your system. But the Typhons won't ever regard you with anything else than instant murderous intent on spot, regardless of how Typhony you are. Here is the thing. In Prey, the player should have been able to develop an ability that involves coexisting and heck, even cooperating with the Typhon to some beneficiary effect. If this decision would have led to a complete and utter lack of fighting the Typhon, then so be it. That is how Prey could have been an immediate classic in my opinion. On the extremes, taming the Typhon indeed would have been a choice, but then the spectacle of the hostile alien race is non-existent. Boo-hoo, I guess. I have bad and even worse news for you. Oh my god, give me the bad news. Oh well, a Typhon will burst out of your chest tomorrow. Jeez, what could be worse news than this? Well, this prognosis is from yesterday.